Hello, this is Will Faber from Art to Ride, and today we're looking at a first submission by Vigdis of her horse Malou. Not sure I'm pronouncing any of those words correctly, but you guys get the idea. So starting off here, this is really good in the walk, and I've watched this tape, of course, and of course what I want to say is the biggest problem that you have is consistency of contact and consistency of position. When you get those things worked out, you're going to have a lot less trouble here with what you're doing. But you're getting some really good work done despite those issues, and we'll talk about those more as we go on. So really good work here in the walk here. This is probably the best that I see throughout this tape is this work in hand. Is that look how she's coming down and the neck is really arching out and forward. Where they're in some of the later work, she almost gets down too far and kind of cranks her head back in the other direction because she's not coming through enough, if that makes any sense. But we'll see that as we go on. But that was really where you'd like her to be and very consistent in that walk work. Now we just have to get you doing the same thing mounted. And the biggest consistency problem, as I said, is with your contact and with the position of your upper body. And we'll talk about that when we get up to that here in a minute. But I think once you get those things solved, you're going to be have a much easier time getting all this done. But you are getting the job done. Despite the fact that in the saddle you're just ahead of the motion most of the time, and that's most of your problem. So really good walk here. Could maybe be a little more active step there. As you can see how she's still a little stiff behind, so even there you'd like to see her step out a little more actively. She was a little better in the other direction. But this is not bad, once again. She could just have a little more active step there, so she picks her legs up and sets them down there a little more actively. And reaches a little more deeply under the body. But you do a great job throughout all this work in hand here, this of keeping consistent contact. And that's the problem that you're having when you're riding, is you're not keeping your contact consistent, and she just gets away with you, gets away from you too quickly because your contact is inconsistent. Here in this work in hand, you do a great job. As she starts to come up, your hand is right there and she feels the contact, and that's what's missing when you're riding, because she's just getting too far away from you before you're able to adjust it or bring her back into the position that you'd like her to be in. Now this walk here already, that's a little better now. She's stepping a little more actively behind. That is picking up the legs more and actually flexing her hock a little more coming down that long side. So that's certainly what we want to see. I remember working this horse last year. Lovely horse, lots and lots of potential. Really look forward to seeing you again this summer in just a couple of months here now. But I'm sure it must be difficult for you guys. I mean, the weather is so bad there. I'm staying consistently, the cold and dark and that sort of thing. I totally understand. And of course, you're forced into a ring where you don't have a lot of space to yourself, so you can't lunge, which would be, you know, what I would do with a horse at this level is lunge it every day before I got on it, just to be sure that I had all that set up. But if you're in a ring with lots of people and you're sharing a public place, that's hard to do. So you can get the job done this way. It would just be quicker if you could get that. In other words, if you could set her up to be really consistent before you got on her, it would be less troublesome once you are. But you're doing a good job of it once again. Your problems are much more in just your riding technique a little bit than it is anything else. As I said, you got the horse in a pretty nice consistent walk there in the stretch, and you were able to maintain it. But just even seeing you sitting here on the horse, you're just always propped slightly forward. And even in your sitting position right there, your shoulders are just a little bit forward and rounded forward. So we've just got to get you more square on your seat bones and get you to stretch up and stay back a little bit more. Because you've got to remember that every time you lean forward, you unbalance the horse. Now, there's a case here later on where the horse starts to sort of buck a little bit in the canter, and you put your shoulders back, and that's where you need to be more of the time. Because when you let your shoulders drop forward, all of a sudden, you know, you're kind of in front of the motion, so to speak. So when the horse is a little sticky, we want to be either in motion with the horse, which means we're sitting absolutely straight up and down, or we stretch up our upper body and bring our shoulders back a little bit and get a little bit behind the motion, which takes the weight off of the center point that you're sitting on in the saddle, which is what we're trying to get to lift up, so the horse feels more freedom there to lift its back when we bring our shoulders back, but also it's easier to maintain contact. So I said, even here in this seated position, you look to me like you're just slightly leaning a little bit forward. And that's what we have to solve for you. Now, it's not so bad here at the walk, but it gets worse as we go on into the trot. Then you really kind of lose your balance to the front all the time. So what you want to think about is this. Every time the horse's head starts to come up, you want to lift your upper body up and back, lifting your chest. So you don't want to slouch down to the saddle, but you want to go back like in a yoga stretch where you're stretching back, as I say, stretching over a barrel, so you keep your back slightly arched as you lift up and back. And that's what lightens your seat. You can even close the top of your thigh into the saddle a little bit to lift your seat off the saddle to give the horse more room. So every time the horse comes up, like you see you're doing here, instead of coming forward and fussing with your hands, what you want to do is lift up and come back and add your leg, and that will push the horse out in front of you and back into the contact. Because that's what's missing from your riding work here, is you're just very often too far forward. So by the time she pops her head up right here, because you're staying so far forward, you tend to lose her out of the contact. And you'll see that as we get more into the trot work here, as you see you go to trot. Now, let me say that if you read the German books on stretching, they will say in those books that you should lean forward when you stretch. The problem is they always show somebody with a very short stirrup. So you can do that if you have a jumping length stirrup. Then you can go like in a 2-point position so your balance doesn't change. But if you have a long dressage length stirrup and you lean forward, you feel like you're going to fall forward, which is exactly what's going to happen because your legs are too long to get over your heels. So bear that in mind in all of this, and anybody who's been confused by reading, the German descriptions of stretching. Once again, for some reason, they don't ever seem to have understood that difference between a short stirrup and a long stirrup and what you have to do, one or the other. So even right here, what I'd like to see you do when she does that is just lifting up a little and coming back with your shoulders. Once again, you want to feel like you lift your chest up and then bring your shoulders back like you're going back over a ball, so to speak, or over a barrel, as opposed to slouching down into the saddle and throwing your shoulders back, which is a very different thing. But here the walk is quite good, and at the walk it's better than it is at the trot. But when we go to the trot, then you'll really see what I'm talking about, is that you really throw yourself forward. Now be sure when you rise to the trot, it looks to me like when you do get to the rising trot that you're rising kind of off your knees. We'll talk about that more as we get there. And you're throwing your shoulders forward in the rising trot instead of bringing your hips forward. Your shoulders in the rising trot should stay just where they are. Once again, unless you're in a jumping length stirrup, then you're going to be in more of a 2-point position kind of thing where your shoulders will be forward, but in that case your legs are short to the same degree. So in other words, the angles match each other, the angle of the upper body to the thigh and the angle of the thigh to the lower leg. So even here, what I'd like to see you doing is just stretching up a little more, and also using that technique here, you're not widening your hands enough to maintain the contact. So a little better stretch there. But that's why she pops out. So when she goes down there, don't try to bring your hands immediately back together, kind of keep them wide till you're sure that you can maintain the contact with the horse's mouth. Because this is, once again, really all that you're missing from all this. And when you get this part of this work together, your position and the idea of contact a little better, you're going to find that all this is going to go much easier for you. So you can see her walk here. She's not really stepping through. You can see how the step is kind of short and a little bit on the stiff side. Right there. And so every time that head comes up, what I'd like to see you do is lift up and back, bring your shoulders up and back, and put your leg on. That will send the horse up to the rein, and of course widening your hands when necessary, like right there. You'd want to widen them right, which you did that time, and you caught her that time, and that's exactly how you want to do it. And then as you feel the ball, then you sit up straight, square on your hips. Now, one thing you might want to check is just to be sure that your saddle is not sitting too low in front, because that's also can make you sit like that, make you, cock your hips a little bit to the front and lean a little bit forward. So be sure that your saddle is sitting in a position that allows you, that you don't feel like you're tipping forward in it. So if you just let your legs relax, you sit in your saddle and you feel like you want to fall forward, the front of it is probably too low. So something to check. And always remember that all saddles, they change and the horses change. I mean, their flocking gets compressed and then the horse's body changes. So we always have to check these things as time goes on. I mean, sometimes horses will change greatly in even a week's time, and we have to change them. Sometimes it's much longer. But if you're doing this work correctly, you just know that your saddle is always going to be need to be refitted every few months, certainly, because otherwise it's not going to fit the horse anymore, because if you're doing this work correctly, the horse's body is going to be changing. Now there was a perfect example there as he started to trot away, and what you should have done is lifted up your upper body and sunk back a little bit with your shoulders, but instead every time she trots a little bit, you come out of the saddle and go on forward with your upper body, and that makes her think she can do just that. So from now on, what I want you to think about doing is stretching up and back. If she tries to take off in the trot, just stay in the saddle. Don't let her pull you up out of the saddle and go with her. In other words, it's passive resistance. So as she takes off, you just kind of become a dead log, just lifting your shoulders up and back, and don't let your body go with her, because if you go with her, then she's going to think, okay, well, it's okay to do this. So same thing here. I just get the impression that your shoulders are slightly forward. Same thing here. What we would like to have seen you do is stretch up and back. Now, you didn't come out of the saddle as much that time, but you could still stretch those shoulders back and lift your chest a little more than you're doing. But once again, it does look to me a little bit like that saddle might be low in front. But once again, check it. It's hard to tell from here. I certainly will check it when I see you. But once again, if you feel like you're falling forward all the time, like if you just sit and let go and you feel like you want to lean over further forward, the saddle's making you feel like that, you might want to put a little something, some shims under the front of the saddle might work. You can buy special under pads that you can put shims in. We use them all the time when we set up horses, like when my wife does a fitting for a professional who uses the same saddle with many different riders. She'll set it up for the widest horse they have, and then give them a shim pad that will make the saddle fit for all the others. So think about that. So now this walk is better here, but here's the problem is, once again, this is where you should be widening your hands right here, so you're losing the contact. So what we want to do, this type of riding is not riding around on a loose rein. That's where people get or no contact. Nothing could be further from the truth. We want contact all of the time, but we want that contact to be the weight of the rein. But if we have a broken line to the horse's mouth, then the horse is going to be able to do whatever it wants to do. Now, yes, you will see pictures of Nuno Oliveira, on fully trained horses where he could hold them in the frame with his back and give the reins, and the horse will stay in the frame. And any well-trained horse will do that. But once again, that's showing a very advanced level horse. That's not where he would have started the horse. He would have started it with contact, and believe me, I watched him work many, many, many horses, and he basically rode with contact, with them. There's this idea that some people have that classical riding is riding around with no contact with the horse's mouth. Nothing could be further from the truth. It's just that we want the contact to be just the weight of the rein, so it's not a forceful contact. Now here, when she goes all the way down like that, you need to ask for a little bit more walk. So now the same thing would apply here. You'd want to stretch up and come back a little bit, and then put your legs on and send her through a little bit more. Now, because she stretches down there, and then she gets this kind of wagging head thing where she almost doesn't really engage through behind. It's kind of like that peanut roller thing. So yes, we want them to stretch, but we want them to move. So as soon as she gets down in that stretch like that, you want to ask her to come through. Now, she does look like she might be trying to relieve herself there a little bit, which can create problems. And when they do, we want to just stay relaxed until they are able to relieve themselves, if that's the case. Because we never want a horse to think that it can't relieve itself when we ride them. That's what leads to horses colicking, because they start not going to the bathroom when they should, then they start clogging up. So we never want to beat up a horse for trying to relieve itself when we ride them. Please, by all means, let them do so. But sometimes, you come out in the cold morning and you just haven't quite got them at the right sequence, and they just feel like they have to go but can't quite get it out, so to speak. And that's a day that you just want to have a nice long walk stretch, keep coming back to that walk and giving them every opportunity to relieve themselves if they can. So same thing here, she's just kind of hollow, she's not through enough. This is where you'd want to come up and send her through to the bridle a little more. Now, once again, it's not bad. She's walking along, her head is kind of down, a little bit of contact, but she's not really swinging through behind. That starts to improve a little bit there. But she's not really ready to be up this high, certainly not up this high with her head and neck and not have some energy coming through a little more. So we need to find that optimal stride in the stretch, and then we simply bring the pole up as high as we can each day to find the working position as it changes as the horse trains and develops. So while this is not a bad walk out here, it's just not a fully connected walk. Now she gets back into a stretch there, and this is where I'm talking about her neck gets a little too low and she kind of flops there at the pole a little bit. And that's where you just want to make her more active until she comes into the contact with the reins. Because once again, it's not just stretching down and having no rein contact. We want them to stretch down into the contact so that when we put our legs on, we feel that bow lift up underneath us. But we have to have contact to make that happen. It's kind of like why the argument for or against riding with no reins. I mean, you can certainly ride a horse with no reins. I did it growing up. We jumped on our horses, all of our horses. You could jump on the field and ride them by just pulling their mane one way or another. But that doesn't mean we're getting them to engage through their back. So relaxation is one thing. Now that was a good start off in the transition there. Now you're still just a little bit propped forward, so you're just leaning ever so slightly forward. You'd like to be a little more up. What I'd like to see you do is close your shoulder blades into your back is what you need to do. Just bring yourself up. And once again, I think looking at this, it looks to me like the front of your saddle might be a little bit too low, which is what tending to pitch you this way a little bit. So once again, check the saddle, but also just try to check yourself up there a little bit more. Same thing coming through there. You see how you're just a little bit too far forward for her at this level. Now the stretch is not bad, it's just a little bit inconsistent. So just like the walk work, every time that you don't get it, you want to stretch up and back and send her through. And of course, the same thing applies if the horse is in the stretch and gets just behind the leg. Then you just have to apply the leg and you want to stay back a little bit. But now that's a pretty good stretch right there. When you get it right, it's looking quite good. And see as she comes up. So every time, what we'd like to see you do is every time she comes up like that, you'd want to stretch up and back, but I'm not seeing any change in your upper body. So you're always keeping that kind of forward. And you let her come back to this kind of trot. Your shoulders were completely forward and you just threw away the reins. So that isn't what you'd want to do at all. Remember, we want to maintain this supple contact between us and the horse all the time, so instead of just throwing away the reins. So that is your biggest problem, is just getting your upper body, lifting your chest up, bringing those shoulders back, and when the horse is hollow, bring them back a little bit more. So you want to either ride with the motion, which means you're straight up and down, or slightly behind the motion when we lift our shoulders and bring them up and back and send the horse through from our legs. And I think when you solve these little rider issues, because you've really got this horse going well, and she's such a beautiful horse. Now right there is really quite good. And this is where you'd want to keep those reins just slightly wide as you keep that contact. Now this is really good. So when we can get to the point, if you can achieve this, ultimately you'll be able to achieve it all the time. But see, what happens is you start to use your hand and you actually lean even more forward when you went to use your hand right there. So we've just got to get you to lift up, lift your eyes up, lift your chest and shoulders up, lift up the front of that saddle if need be, if that's what it takes to get that to happen. Same thing here, you're just too far forward on the back of the horse, you're leaning too far forward. And remember, in other words, when I'm watching you rise the trot, your shoulders are going up and forward instead of your hips. Your shoulders are moving more than your hips. And what we want to do is get this point where our shoulders don't hardly move at all. It's our hips that come up and forward and back instead of our shoulders going up, forward, and back. So think about that. You can even practice a little control of that on the ground by doing a little practice your sitting trot from the ground, just squatting with your knees and trying to keep your upper leg where they are and keep your upper body back. Now see here, you do sit up and back a little bit because the horse is cantering with you and you feel a little cautious there. So see how you're sitting up here? That's really much more what you need to do in the trot. See how you're bringing your shoulders up and back here? That's what you want to do. So you're doing that here because you probably feel a little insecure. But you want to get that same feeling. Now, just like here, now that was good. You kept your shoulders back till you got her moving, and then you came a little bit forward in a two-point position, and that's what you want to do. So that's really what we want to get you doing. You're actually cantering better than you're trotting. So if you can get the same thing to start happening in the trotting, just like you're getting her to come forward to the bridle really quite nicely here in the canter, and once again, if you can, then it's all fine, you know. Should you canter? You should canter if you can canter. That's the idea. So great work here today. I'm really looking forward to seeing you in May. If you'll just get your upper body stretched upwards and backwards and concentrating on keeping more consistency, you come back to the trot here, and what do? Already your shoulders are way forward. Here you're back in the walk again. Your shoulders are way forward. So that being the biggest part of your problem is getting this, getting your position more consistent so you can keep a consistent contact with the back of the horse. And that's quite good. Once you get her to there, she's getting up over her back in the canter. And that's okay to be in a two-point position once you get that. But when she's not, just like you were in the other direction, you want to stretch up and back. So just do what you did in that first canter in your trot work more, lifting up and back, keeping the contact consistent, and you're going to get there. Great job. I look forward to seeing you in May, and all of our good friends in May. Look forward to seeing everybody in Norway for the retreat. See you then. It's Will Faerber from Art to Ride.